She lived in rejection due to her limbs until a human medic rebuilt her future. Lyra was born under the crimson moons of Arcturus Prime, her skin bearing the silver shimmer of her people, the Valtheri. But where perfection was demanded, she carried imperfection. Her left arm ended at the elbow, twisted and underdeveloped, while her right bore fingers that curled inward like broken branches. In a society that prized physical harmony above all else, she was an anomaly that brought shame to her family's lineage. The Valtheri called her Kethany, the incomplete one. Her parents, once proud members of the Crystal Council, found themselves ostracized by association. Her mother, Velana, would stroke Lyra's hair in the darkness of their quarters, whispering apologies that should never have been needed. Her father, Jorvith, grew distant, his eyes avoiding his daughter's gaze as if her very existence was a wound that wouldn't heal. When Lyra reached her 15th year, the Council of Perfection made their decree. She would be sent to Kepler for to be a mining colony on the edge of civilized space where the imperfect were exiled to serve their final purpose. The shuttle that carried her away was filled with others like her, the disabled, the disfigured, the genetically variant. They sat in silence, each carrying their own burden of rejection. As the transport ship Forgotten Star pulled away from Arcturus Prime, Lyra pressed her face against the small porthole, watching her home world shrink to a point of light. She didn't cry. Tears had been a luxury she'd abandoned years ago. Instead, she whispered to her reflection, maybe we were never meant for. They're kind of perfect. The journey to Kepler for to be took 3 weeks. During this time, Lyra met others who would become her unlikely family. Dex, a young man whose legs had been crushed in an industrial accident. Mira, an elderly woman whose mind worked differently than others expected. And Kale, a veteran whose scarred face told stories of battles fought for people who later discarded him. When they finally arrived at the mining colony, the site was more desolate than any of them had imagined. The planet's surface was a tapestry of rust-colored canyons and perpetual dust storms. The settlement, called Haven's End, consisted of prefabricated structures that had seen better decades. This wasn't just exile, it was a slow death sentence disguised as mercy. The colony overseer, a bitter man named Garrett, assigned them to their quarters and work details without ceremony. "You're here to mine, not to make friends," he announced. "The sooner you accept that this is all you're good for, the easier it'll be." But as Lyra lay in her narrow bunk that first night, listening to the wind howl across the barren landscape, she felt something unexpected stirring within her chest. Not hope exactly, but a quiet defiance. She had survived 15 years of being told she was worthless. Perhaps surviving here would teach her something else entirely. The other exiles had begun to gather in the common area, sharing stories and forming bonds that their home worlds had forbidden. For the first time in her life, Lyra was surrounded by people who understood what it meant to be discarded. In this place of supposed ending, something new was beginning to grow. Life at Haven's End was brutally simple. Wake before dawn, descend into the mines, extract precious minerals until your body screamed for mercy, return to the surface, collapse, repeat. Lyra's malformed limbs made traditional mining impossible, so she was assigned to the sorting facility, separating valuable crystals from worthless rock with her feet and the limited mobility of her right hand. Dr. Elena Vasquez arrived at the colony 6 months after Lyra. She was a Terran xenobiologist who had volunteered for the remote assignment after losing her research position on Earth due to her radical theories about adaptive evolution. Elena was everything the exiles weren't supposed to encounter: someone who chose to be there, someone who saw potential instead of deficiency. Elena's first meeting with Lyra came during a medical inspection. As she examined Lyra's limbs, her touch was clinical but kind. "Have you ever considered prosthetics?" she asked quietly. Lyra laughed bitterly. "With what resources? Besides, they told me back home that nothing could help." "They were wrong," Elena said simply, making notes on her tablet. "There are possibilities they never told you about." The days began to change when Elena started spending her off hours in the common areas, talking with the exiles about their lives before Havens. And she listened without judgment, asked thoughtful questions, and slowly began to see the colony not as a dumping ground but as a community of survivors with untapped potential. The crisis came during the winter storm season. A massive dust storm knocked out the main power grid, trapping half the mining crew in the lower tunnels. The emergency systems failed, and rescue equipment sat broken in storage. Garrett panicked, declaring the trapped miners a necessary loss. Elena refused to accept this. Working with Dex, who had become the unofficial leader among the exiles, she jury-rigged a communications system using salvaged parts. But reaching the trapped miners required someone small enough to navigate the collapsed maintenance shafts. Someone like Lyra. I can't grip the safety lines, Lyra protested when Elena proposed the plan. Then we'll find another way, Elena replied, her eyes blazing with determination. You're not defined by what you can't do. Working through the night, Elena and Dex created a harness system that distributed weight across Lyra's torso rather than relying on her arms. The other exiles fashioned lights and communication equipment that could be operated with minimal hand movement. When dawn broke, Lyra descended into the darkness, carrying hope on her shoulders. The rescue took 18 hours. Lyra crawled through spaces that would have been impossible for anyone with standard proportions, her unique build becoming an advantage rather than a disability. She reached the trapped miners, established communication, and guided the rescue teams to their location. All 17 were saved. That night, as the colony celebrated, Elena found Lyra sitting alone outside the medical bay, staring at her hands in the artificial light. You were magnificent down there, Elena said, settling beside her. I felt useful, Lyra whispered, as if afraid to speak the words too loudly. For the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Elena placed her hand gently over Lyra's twisted fingers. You've always belonged. The question is where you want to build your future. In that moment, under the alien stars of Kepler for to be, Lyra felt something shift inside her chest. Not healing, she was too wise to believe in simple remedies, but the first stirring of something she'd never dared to name. The possibility of being loved exactly as she was. Elena's workshop became the heart of Haven's End's transformation. What had started as a standard medical bay evolved into something unprecedented, a laboratory where discarded beings were helping to rebuild themselves and each other. Elena had requisitioned supplies under the guise of improving colony efficiency, but her true mission was far more revolutionary. The first breakthrough came when Elena successfully created a neural interface that could translate Lyra's intended movements into mechanical action, even with her limited nerve pathways. The prosthetic arms weren't crude industrial replacements, but elegant extensions crafted from lightweight alloys and equipped with sensory feedback systems that Elena had designed based on her xenobiology research. The beauty of adaptation, Elena explained as she calibrated the interface, is that it's not about returning to some original state. It's about becoming something new, something better suited to your environment and dreams. The installation process took place over several weeks. Elena worked with infinite patience, adjusting neural pathways, fine-tuning response times, and ensuring that each component integrated seamlessly with Lyra's existing biology. Dex, who had become skilled at electronics repair, assisted with the technical aspects while Mira provided emotional support during the more difficult moments. When Lyra first flexed her new fingers and felt the subtle vibration of Elena's pulse through the synthetic skin, she wept. Not from sorrow, but from a joy so overwhelming it had nowhere else to go. I can feel you, she whispered, wonder filling her voice. And I can feel you, Elena replied, tears streaming down her own face. Word of Elena's work spread beyond Havens, and other colonies began sending their unwanted populations, not for exile but for the possibility of transformation. The settlement expanded, adding research facilities, training centers, and workshops where people learned to build not just their own prosthetics but entirely new lives. Lyra became Elena's partner in every sense of the word. During the day, she worked alongside Elena in the lab, her new arms allowing her to perform delicate procedures and complex assembly work. Her unique perspective, having lived with limitation before enhancement, made her invaluable in designing interfaces for others. In the evenings, they would walk the perimeter of the colony, their hands intertwined, planning expansions and dreaming of what their community could become. The relationship between them grew organically, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Elena never treated Lyra as a patient to be fixed or a project to be completed. Instead, she saw Lyra as a collaborator, an equal partner in creating something the galaxy had never seen, a place where difference was valued, not eliminated. Their first kiss happened in the workshop late one night, surrounded by half-finished prosthetics and diagnostic equipment. Elena had been adjusting the sensitivity settings on Lyra's fingertips when Lyra cupped her face with both hands, marveling at the gentle precision she could now control. I love you, Lyra said simply. Not because you gave me these arms, but because you saw me before I had them. Elena's response was wordless, expressed through the tender way she drew Lyra closer, the careful reverence with which she traced the interface points where flesh met metal, the promise implicit in the way she held her as if she were precious. Beyond measure, the colony continued to grow, attracting not just those seeking transformation but researchers, engineers, and visionaries who wanted to be part of something revolutionary. Haven's End was becoming something unprecedented, a society that celebrated adaptation rather than conformity, that saw beauty in diversity rather than perfection in uniformity. As Lyra stood in their shared quarters one evening, watching Elena work by lamplight, she realized that redemption hadn't come from changing herself to fit the galaxy's expectations. It had come from finding someone who loved the galaxy enough to help change it instead. 3 years after the first prosthetic integration, a sleek diplomatic vessel bearing the insignia of Arcturus Prime appeared in Haven's End's orbital space. The message was formal, couched in bureaucratic language that barely concealed its true intent. They wanted to study the medical breakthrough that had occurred at the mining colony. More specifically, they wanted to examine Lyra and bring her home as proof of their enlightened approach to genetic diversity. The delegation that arrived was led by Counselor Theron, a woman whose cold beauty epitomized Valtheri perfection. Accompanying her were geneticists, political advisors, and to Lyra's shock her mother, Velana, looking older and more fragile than Lyra remembered. The reunion was orchestrated for maximum political impact, held in the colony's main assembly hall with recording devices capturing every moment. Daughter, Velana said, her voice breaking slightly as she approached Lyra. You look magnificent. Lyra stood perfectly still, her new arms relaxed at her sides. 3 years of working with Elena had taught her to recognize manipulation, even when wrapped in maternal emotion. Hello, mother. You look exactly the same. Counselor Theron stepped forward, her smile calculated to convey warmth she didn't feel. Lyra of House Aetherius, we come to right a wrong. Your transformation represents a breakthrough that could benefit all Valtheri. We offer you full restoration to your family's standing, research facilities beyond anything you have here, and the honor of being the first in a new program of adaptive enhancement. Elena, standing beside Lyra, felt the subtle tension in her partner's posture. They had anticipated this moment, but the reality of it still struck like a physical blow. The offer was everything Lyra had once dreamed of: acceptance, recognition, return to a world that had cast her out. What exactly are you asking? Lyra replied, her voice steady. Come home, Velana pleaded. Help us understand what was done to you so we can help others like you. You could be a leader, a pioneer. You could ensure that no other child suffers what you suffered. Lyra walked to the nearest workstation, where a young exile named Thomas was receiving his first prosthetic installation. Elena had trained Lyra to perform these procedures herself, and her hands moved with practiced precision as she adjusted the interface alignment. Thomas, who had been born without legs, smiled up at her with pure trust. You want to study what was done to me, Lyra said, without looking up from her work. But you're asking the wrong question. The question isn't what was done to me, it's what I chose to become. She completed the calibration and helped Thomas stand. His first steps were careful, tentative, but his joy was radiant. Around the assembly hall, dozens of other enhanced individuals went about their daily work: research, construction, teaching, creating. This wasn't a medical facility. It was a thriving community. Lyra finally turned to face the delegation. I was never broken. You were never healing me. You were discarding me because I didn't fit your definition of acceptable. Now you want to claim credit for the life I built after you threw me away. Counselor Theron's composure began to crack. You could help countless others. I am helping countless others, Lyra interrupted. Right here, every day. Without your approval or supervision. Elena stepped forward, her hand finding Lyra's. The gesture was simple, but its meaning was clear. Whatever choice Lyra made, she wouldn't make it alone. Velana looked between her daughter and the human woman, understanding dawning in her eyes. You love her. I love her, Lyra confirmed. And she loves me. Not the me you wanted me to be. Not the me you're imagining I could become. The me I actually am. The delegation's departure was swift and tense. Promises of continued correspondence were made, but everyone understood they were meaningless. Arcturus Prime wanted a success story they could control, not a revolution they couldn't contain. That night, as the diplomatic ship became another point of light among the stars, Lyra and Elena stood on the observation deck they had built together. "Any regrets?" Elena asked softly. Lyra lifted her hands, watching the way starlight played across the interface points where her new life began. "Only that it took me so long to realize I was already home. 5 years had passed since the diplomatic visit, and Haven's End had evolved beyond anyone's wildest projections. What began as a mining colony for the discarded had become the Kepler Institute, a renowned center for adaptive technologies and inclusive design. Delegations arrived weekly, not to reclaim citizens but to learn from the revolutionary approaches to human enhancement and community building that had emerged from necessity and love. Lyra had become the Institute's Director of Integration, a role that combined her technical skills with her deep understanding of what it meant to live between worlds. Her days were filled with consultations, research collaborations, and the delicate work of helping newcomers navigate their transformations, not just physical, but psychological and social as well. Elena, now the chief medical officer, had published papers that were reshaping the field of prosthetic integration across the galaxy. But more importantly, she had created protocols that prioritized the individual's sense of identity and autonomy rather than conformity to standardized norms. Their workshop had evolved into a state-of-the-art facility where art and science merged to create enhancements that were as unique as the people who wore them. The Institute had also become a family. Dex ran the engineering department, his wheelchair accessible, designs improving life for everyone in the community. Mira had established the integration support network, helping newcomers adjust to their new lives and abilities. Kale oversaw security, but his real talent lay in crisis counseling, helping people process the trauma of rejection and abandonment that had brought them to Kepler for to be. On a crisp autumn morning, Lyra stood in the center of the main plaza, surrounded by children who had never known a world where difference was shameful. They were the second generation, some born to Institute residents, others refugees from societies that still clung to narrow definitions of normal. To them, Lyra's arms weren't remarkable technology. They were simply part of who she was, as natural as Elena's laugh or Dex's terrible jokes. "Tell us about the old days," one little girl asked, tugging on Lyra's sleeve. Her name was Zara, and she had been born with a rare condition that affected her spine. The mobility suit Elena had designed for her allowed her to run and play with the other children, but more importantly, she had never been told she was anything other than perfect exactly as she was. "Well," Lyra said, settling on one of the benches that dotted the plaza, "once upon a time, people thought there was only one way to be beautiful, one way to be strong, one way to be valuable." "How silly," another child piped up. This was Marcus, whose neural differences had made him an outcast on his birth world but allowed him to see patterns and connections that escaped others. "Don't they know that gardens need lots of different flowers?" Elena approached from across the plaza, her hair now streaked with silver but her eyes as bright as ever. She carried a tablet displaying the morning's messages, requests for consultation, applications for residency, updates from former Institute members who had gone on to establish similar communities throughout the galaxy. "Morning briefing?" Lyra asked, accepting the tablet and Elena's kiss with equal warmth. 3 new arrival requests, funding approval for the lunar expansion, and Elena paused, a strange expression crossing her face. "A personal message from Arcturus Prime." The children scattered to their various activities as Lyra opened the message. It was from her mother, now graying and bearing the weight of years that had passed since their last meeting. The words were simple. "I was wrong about everything. Would you consider letting me visit? Not as a representative of the council, but as your mother. I want to see what you've built. I want to understand who you've become." Lyra read the message twice, then handed the tablet back to Elena. For a moment, she stood in silence, watching the bustling activity of the plaza. People moved with purpose and joy, their various enhancements and adaptations, creating a symphony of diversity. Some used wheelchairs, others prosthetics. Still others had modifications that were purely aesthetic expressions of identity rather than corrections of deficiency. "What are you thinking?" Elena asked gently. "I'm thinking," Lyra said slowly, "that maybe it's time for some of them to learn what we've learned. That love isn't about making someone fit your expectations. It's about expanding your expectations to fit who they actually are." Elena smiled, the expression that had first shown Lyra what acceptance looked like. Should I prepare a guest quarters? Yes, Lyra said, taking Elena's hand in both of hers, marveling, as she always did, at the perfect integration of sensation and intention that allowed her to feel the warmth of her partner's skin through synthetic fingertips. And Elena, thank you. For what? For seeing me when I couldn't see myself. For building me arms that could hold you back. For teaching me that love isn't about being fixed, it's about being free to become. As they walked hand in hand toward the Institute's main building, past gardens where vegetables grew in adaptive hydroponic systems designed by former outcasts, past workshops where the next generation of prosthetics took shape under careful hands, past dormitories where people slept safely for the first time in their lives, Lyra felt the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. The galaxy was changing, one person at a time, one community at a time. And at the center of it all was a simple truth that she and Elena had proven every day for 8 years, that everyone deserves to be loved exactly as they are. And everyone deserves the tools to become exactly who they're meant to be.